Venice is an interesting one. They do have a lot of inaccuracies, but I like the way the developers have gone about creating this faction when they designed its playstyle. Welcome to this week's episode of Total War Profiled, and today we are looking behind the historical accuracy of Venice in Medieval 2 Total War, as voted on by Patreons. Let's begin with the map, and this has been incredibly exaggerated. By 1080, Venice was just Venice really, but the game adds Ragusa and Crete, which they would not own until later on in its history. Overall though, I like the devs' decision. It gives the faction more flavour and, in a way, accuracy, despite it being inaccurate. Venice owning Venice would be more accurate, but the fact that they added small pockets of land to boost trade and their later influence is a great representation of what Venice would later become. So its territory is inaccurate, but the way they've designed it has made their playstyle more accurate. So I think it's worth it overall, and I like that they did this. Now, Venice being a trade-based empire, it is interesting to see all the little details that they added in the game to represent their power. For example, Venice starts off the game with the largest fleet and ports in every settlement. This is to represent not only trade, but their navy, which was able to defend all of their ports at once. A vast amount of wealth starts off flowing into Venice, with a chance to greatly increase that further. On top of this, as Venice was small but a rich nation, a lot of their military, historically, were dependent on mercenaries. This is shown in the game through the large mercenary unit pool, which they have access to in their own areas and surrounding their starting region. Sadly, this nation's family is very limited when it comes to their historical backing. During 1080, the start date, the faction leader of Venice is Doge Domenico, who was historically accurate and known as Domenico Salvo. He has the trait Promising Defender. Domenico secured the borders of Venice peacefully and gained an alliance with the Byzantine Empire. Maybe that was what the Promising Defender was a reference to. He also has a trait that references him being unforgiving. Now, there is nothing about him being unforgiving that I could find, but the people were mostly unforgiving towards him. When the Venetians lost an offensive for Corfu, he was forced to abdicate and a new Doge was elected. So they were kind of unforgiving to him for his first mistake. Apart from that, Venice did really well under him, but that one mistake and he was out. In game, he starts off at 47 years of age. I usually like to look into the age of characters to see how it matches, but sadly I can't really here as his date of birth is unknown. However, some historians estimate it was 1013, which would make him 67 at the start date, not 47. He has the traits politician and bureaucrat. This is mostly to represent the required skills a leader would need to get elected as the Doge of Venice. In game, his wife is Helena. Historically, his wife was Theodora. Now, little is known about this Doge. In game, he has 3 children and 4 grandchildren. There is no historical reference that I could find of him having any children at all. I would say, given the game's limitations and the fact the developers had very little to go by, I really cannot feel I can mark them down for this. They are all fiction, but the devs had no real choice here, as if they went the historical accuracy route, then the faction would be on the Medieval 2 engine. It would have been incredibly dull, terrible, and probably would die to regicide almost instantly. Last but certainly not least, the unit roster. As an Italian nation, they get access to the usual Italian units, including the Territorial standard. They also gain access to the Venetian heavy infantry and the Venetian archers. The infantry unit carries a warhammer, a war space hammer. I could not find any reference to this weapon being used particularly by the Venetians. However, both of their custom units are heavily armoured. This level of armour is used in the game to reflect the wealth that the Venetians had access to, and the tradable goods such as armour or whatever they needed to make it that flowed through the nation. Their main unique unit is oddly a cav unit. The type the game calls its biggest weakness, cavalry, but they have access to the light cavalry, the Stradiates. These were units from the Balkans which were recruited by Venice as mercenaries during the 15th century to help defeat the Ottomans. In game though, they can just train them as a normal unit. Like, normal recruitable unit, not a mercenary. Historically, they were a light cavalry unit. And that is everything. A very short one, I know, but there was not much to really talk about here. That being said, I don't feel I can mark the developers down for inaccuracies, as they had very little to go off. A Republic mechanic would have been nice, but that would have been far too much of a development stretch for CA at that time. Overall though, I like what they have done with this faction. I will give it an even 3 stars for its accuracies. Not good, not bad, just in the middle. Yet don't get me wrong, great for gameplay. If a faction did receive 5 stars, it would have been incredibly limited. Less settlements, less family members, and it would have not worked right at all, or been fun in the game. So, despite me marking it down slightly for its accuracy, I am happy they did it. Subscribe for more, share with someone you think may be interested. Next week we will be looking into a faction from a newer title. But for now, goodbye.